Hey, everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Let's talk about original sin. It has hit the stores. Have you purchased yours? Everybody's talking about it. But it's a challenge to talk about it now because we now have the news that has been very painful for all of us to hear. Look, whatever your political disagreements are about with anyone, you never want to hear that they're struggling with their health, particularly in a life and death struggle. And we understand that President Biden is in that kind of struggle. He has a very aggressive and very advanced form of prostate cancer. He's had a lot of health challenges before, but this is a big one at a particular time in his life when he's particularly vulnerable. And so my love and my prayers go out to him, his wife, his children, well, his son, his grandchildren, his whole family, people who I've known to fully disclose. I've known them, oh my goodness, since I was a kid. And so, that having been said, my love goes out to them. My love goes out to them. I have a father who has his own health struggles. And so, um, and I just had family. We all do. We're human. My pastor's wife said, you know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. So there it is. We could all be there. And if you live long enough, you will be. Or if anything happens in your life, things happen. But we're praying for that family. That having been said, we can't be derailed from a discussion that we've got to have, and we need to have it right now, about original sin. And with whom did this sin originate? You had the White House, who did not disclose, and most specifically, um, staffers, staffers who would not disclose the extent to which the president was in cognitive decline. You had top Democrats who would not do the same. You had the corporate media. It's a whole lot of people who protected themselves in order to keep this train going on the tracks. See, the person who is probably the second most powerful person in Washington is not anyone who's in Congress, not even uh, the Speaker of the House. No, not the Senate Majority or Minority Leader. No, no. It is the White House Chief of Staff. They are the gatekeeper. They determine who the president likes, dislikes, immediately or eventually. They decide what's top of mind for him or her. And that happens really in all areas where you see power. That secretary, that chief of staff, the person who runs the office, they run the show. And then the people who are closest to them help to run the show. There were a lot of people who had an interest, a vested interest in President Biden remaining in power, at least in place, as adult as he was. And now we see that he was also ill. Zeke Emanuel, Dr. Zeke Emanuel, Rahm Emanuel's brother, who is one of the architects of the Affordable Care Act, said he's known about this for some time. That is his speculation. A lot of people have, but I'm not going to get into that. Although this is a very advanced form of prostate cancer, and you typically catch it very early. But here we are. And some people, Democrats chief among them, are trying to use this illness to shut down this discussion that we absolutely have to have. Democrats are more unpopular than they've ever been in the modern era because people feel that they were not told the truth, and that is true. Can we trust the people in the White House? And I mean whether it's Democrats or Republicans. Because, with Edith Wilson did this with Woodrow Wilson. He'd had a stroke. She didn't want to tell anybody. They were trying to keep a lid on it. And mind you, this is before computers. This is 100 years ago. So this can happen. But people kept asking. See, it's Americans kept asking, what's going on with the president? And the media, deceptive as they are, kept saying it's about age. No, it's not about age. No. You can function well into the day you die. People are living, what did they say, 50 is a new 30. People are not aging the way they used to. So it was never age. It was about his cognitive state. And it was very clear that he was challenged. We now see that they were going to put him in a wheelchair after he won the election. We now see all you had to see was Nish, you always see the president walk to the helicopter by himself. No, the staff decided they were going to surround him because he would fall. He was prone to falling. Just think about all of that. No, we need to have this conversation right now. Because if I'm not even caught up in the Democrats, quite frankly, but Americans need another option. Because right now we're losing our jobs. The dollar is losing its value. And we keep hearing senators on the Republican side say, hey, we've got to make the cuts, otherwise we're facing insolvency. So the country is in deep, 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 deep economic trouble, and somebody needs to tell us something. And we need some elected officials who will behave in Congress as if they are a co-equal branch of the executive branch. We need help. More than 34 million American children are looking at not having any food. Medicaid is being cut. We need help. Come on, everybody. And the Democrats are not in a position really to help us, Norman Solomon, because there's so much mistrust and distrust. Oh, everybody, please go to Blue Sky, the Santita Jackson.bsky.social. I'm on Twitter X, at Santita J. The Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. Please meet me there. But also, hey, Bernadette, Robert got here before you did, girly girl, on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Having said all that I've said, let me bring on someone who does not want it, but I am going to say you do deserve an apology from everybody. Don't run, Joe. That's what she said. Please don't do it. Roots Action went on out there. They were called blasphemers. They were dragged by the party and the establishment. They said, no, you were going to be a transitional president. And we really need to get this bench out here running if we have a chance of beating someone who appears to be very strong, and that is Donald Trump. He wouldn't move. Wouldn't move. But they stuck themselves out, stuck their necks out very boldly and said, hey, for the sake of the country, please, Joe, don't run. Please don't do it. And they got traction. They couldn't get on corporate media, but they sure did get traction. So, Fairness and Accuracy and Reporter co-founder, Institute for Policy Studies founder, all of my news sources. I just got to go with you, Norman Solomon. You got to help me. Original Sin. What do you think of the book? I saw you quoted in the Guardian article, which was a pretty compelling overview. And I've read so many different overviews of the book. But I have to tell you, I want to know what you think of the book and what you think of Jake Tapper. Because he's co-authored the book with a reporter who actually tried to sound the alarm, Alex Thompson. Just trying a little bit. But Jake Tapper was someone who was a bulldog for the administration. If you dared raise the specter of the president struggling on any level, he was so condescending. Help me to understand, what is this book? What is the book? First of all, what does the book say? Because what a title. But now I'm wondering who it applies to. Is it the White House? Is it the Democrats? Is it the corporate media? Is it the authors themselves? Norman Solomon, take it away.
There's a lot of original sins to go around.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of to look at the book's entrance into the universe. It was really drumrolled starting about 3 months ago. And the buzz went out that this was the book that the Biden family, the Biden team, was the most worried about, because there's been a spate of books. And we can see why, having read the book. I say 2 cheers for this book, not 3, but 2 cheers for the book, because it brought out into the open as never before, sometimes with anonymous sources, sometimes naming those who spoke to the authors, just how thorough, how deep, how methodical the cover-up was. And indeed, it was a cover-up. And it wasn't a 60-40 or a 70-30. It was a 95-5.
Hmm.
This guy who was president was not arguably even capable of finishing his first term, let
Yeah.
alone serving the second one or running a credible campaign for reelection. And yet we have so many layers here because, as you alluded to, the chief of staff, the others at the White House basically running the show, certainly the Biden family, they circled around and protected Biden's self-concept of being able to fulfill the duties of the presidency. There were cabinet members cited in the book who said that 2 a.m. phone call, he's not capable of being president at 2 a.m. And we need somebody 24/7. So that was just a travesty that there was indeed so much of a cover up. That said, and Santita, you referred to this, Jake Tapper, lead CNN anchor. There's video of him absolutely ripping into the Wall Street Journal when they reported shortly before the ill-fated debate that sunk Biden's reelection effort. The Wall Street Journal really methodically reported that Biden was often checked out, that he wasn't capable of having a coherent conversation. They had numerous sources, and no surprise, not a single Democratic source would allow her or his name to be used. And so what Jake Tapper did on CNN was to denounce this Wall Street Journal reporting as a hit job. And he said, "Oh, well, look at the only named sources are Republicans," without pointing out, maybe he realized it, maybe he didn't, that the only reason there weren't named Democratic sources was they were too cowardly to do that because they were too afraid of the Biden White House. So here we have Jake Tapper, who goes along basically with the cover up, as you said, basically functioning as an attack dog for the prevaricators and the cover up squad in the White House. Then he comes out with this book denouncing the cover up.
What was that? I mean, just to me, that is the hypocrisy is glaring.
Yeah.
I mean, he's even hired a crisis manager. I was reading Risa Heller, who is well known. She managed the crisis surrounding Harvey Weinstein, Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos, Jeff Toobin, and others. It's one thing to go on a book tour. You have your PR team, right? But it's something else to go to roll out. Your PR person is a crisis manager. Why do you think he chose a crisis manager as opposed to a regular public relations team?
Desperation.
Before
sank
he, do you
into
think he knew the storm was coming?
I'm not even sure that he makes some of these decisions. I mean, the book makes clear that Jill Biden is a crucial player in these decisions, especially having to do with Joe Biden's future. But whoever made the decision to bring in crisis management knew that this book was coming. They were worried. They rolled him out. They rolled Joe Biden out to a couple of interviews, one with the BBC, another on ABC's The View, just days before this book was leaked out. And it leaked out on the 13th of May. The pub date was the 20th. I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to get the book ahead of time because I was assigned by The Nation magazine to write about it. And then the New York Times broke the embargo last Tuesday. And so then we published a few hours later at the Nation site. The drum roll was just so intense. And I have no doubt the Biden people knew a lot of what the content would be. And so they realized we better get on this and have a schedule. We get Joe Biden out first, a couple friendly interviews, and then we have a crisis management team in place. And the fact is that, and I certainly agree with you, we should feel complete compassion
Mm.
for Joe Biden and his family with this terrible illness that he's struggling with. It certainly wasn't discovered in the last few days. So there was a strategic crisis management decision made to release this news about 36 hours before the publication date of the book Original Sin.
It's so cynical. Help me to understand, well, who is Dr. Jill Biden? Because she does appear to loom large in this story.
She's someone who is, to her credit, very assertive and strong-willed. She has a higher degree in education. She's an educator. And it's become clear from the Original Sin book more than ever that she's an enabler for her husband, Joe Biden. And there's the notorious moment when he came off the stage of the catastrophic debate last year on June 27th for all the world to see his frailties, his lack of capacity to be coherent. And she exclaimed publicly, "Joe, you did so great. You remembered all the facts."
Wow.
And that's just so sad. And I think it was really a travesty that Jill Biden, most of all, and other family members would put Joe Biden out on that debate stage.
I couldn't believe it.
How unkind.
I thought it was. I said, no, wait a minute. Because I was surprised that he got through the State of the Union address. Because you had seen that he was ill. I saw it. It was very clear. And when he was finished with the State of the Union address, I was relieved. But then I said, I wonder what have they put him on? Because his cognitive decline by that time was significant. Significant.
And the press corps was so adulatory because he could read a teleprompter.
Would you help me to understand this? Because to me, there's several, oh, well, that's an estate, but I would say several pillars of the establishment to me that are culpable here. So let's look at them. Let's look at the press corps. Help me to understand. And if you would explain the Washington press corps to our listeners and viewers, because I think they need to understand just how cloistered they are and that they are an institution and they protect themselves. We see it with the Washington correspondents, White House Correspondents' Dinner. Who are they?
Well, there's source protection and there's self-protection, and they go hand in hand. It's called beat sweeteners, where if you're at the White House and you want to get exclusives and sit down interviews with the president or vice president, then you don't rock their boat. And if you do rock their boat, you're going to be a pariah and you're not going to get those leaks. You're not going to get those prestigious interviews. And so there's a winnowing process, and there's also a sort of a piranha process, if I can use the fish metaphor, where if somebody is going down politically, then there's a feeding frenzy. I think one dynamic, and I certainly can identify with this in some sense, many in the press corps understood that Donald Trump was a dire threat to democracy. And although they saw often firsthand that Joe Biden was falling apart in terms of a capacity to be a competent president, setting aside the political decisions, just competency, they saw on the horizon galloping up, like riding in one of the horses of the apocalypse, Donald Trump. And so I think that was a factor where a lot in the press corps, along with the usual attractions to power and so forth, they felt, well, we're going to not go to the mat on this with President Biden.
That having been said, that still doesn't work because in November of 2022, not for me, Roots Action, you really said the quiet part out loud. You said, don't run, Joe. Stop. Don't do this. Because there were people who, please, the most popular elected official in the United States is the person that the Democrats stopped, who's Bernie Sanders. If there's a rumor that this man is going to be somewhere, 10, 20, 30, 50,000 people show up. And he crosses partisan lines. But the Democrats don't want him.
Right.
They choose whom they want to be the nominee. We've been through this before, have we not?
Yeah.
We get it. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So that having been said, the Democrats disallowed us to have a primary process. They wouldn't let anyone else run, Norman Solomon.
It was a travesty. And as you note, it was November 9th of 2022. So just a few days after the midterms, when at Roots Action, we announced the Don't Run Joe campaign. We launched it first in New Hampshire, which at that point was expected to be the first in the nation, as usual, presidential primary. And for instance, our political director, Sam Rosenthal, went to a Democratic National Committee meeting in Philadelphia with some flyers. We rented a huge billboard truck that circled the hotel where the DNC was meeting that said, "Don't Run Joe." And he later told our staff how he was met with derision, with anger, with mockery.
Oh, yeah.
What do you mean President Biden shouldn't run again? How terrible that you would even say that. What kind of Democrat are you, et cetera, et cetera. And that persisted for 18 or 19 months until June of last year when the catastrophic debate took place.
And these are insiders who are in the DNC.
Yeah.
So these are people who know. When you go to events, everybody doesn't get backstage to see the president, to do the, what do they say, the grip and grin. That's what George W. Bush used to call it. It was funny, but it's true. You're taking the picture, you grip, you grin. Good to see you. Nice chat, chit chat. Done it a whole lot myself. Get it? But people knew, Norman Solomon, people knew that he was in real medical danger. That he was in cognitive decline. And now we see that he has advanced cancer. I mean, my goodness. These people knew, they knew. And yet anyone who even asked a question privately, you were met with this fusillade of anger. It was like, wait a minute, hold on, aren't we trying to win here?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out who they were protecting.
Themselves. It was a climate of fear. And I think it's what is so difficult about changing course for the Democratic Party, because not only looking out for the party ostensibly, but you have to wonder, but one's own career, one's status. Will you ever eat lunch in this town again? That sort of thing. And the net result, ironically, is that in the name of protecting the party, it damages the party. In the name of defeating Donald Trump, it helps Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still here in the present because as we're having this discussion, of course, the Republican Party controlling the White House, controlling both houses of Congress, controlling a lot of the judiciary, they are engaged in destroying the fabric of democracy. They're engaging in war on low-income people, middle-class people, basically everybody who's not rich, but especially vicious against those who are the most marginalized by the economic and political system, the most vulnerable. It's a kick down politics with extremism. That's what we're up against. This federal government now is in the control of people who came to power largely because of the failure of the Democratic Party to stop them.
Was that not a calculation for the power structure of the DNC?
They thought they were the smartest people in the room. They thought they could have their fancy cake and eat it too. They figured that Donald Trump, and what a terrible guess, we've heard this before, he would destroy himself. When did we hear that before? 2016, we heard that. We heard that last year. Oh, all we have to do is show up and Donald Trump will bring himself down. That doesn't work. We've seen that again and again. And there is a sort of feathering one's own nest. I give an example in a piece I wrote last week for The Nation on this about the Original Sin book and what's involved, where I went to the Unity Reform Commission meetings in 2017, and that was run by the Democratic National Committee. The Bernie forces were at high ebb, very powerful, had done so well in 2016 primaries. And so the Hillary Clinton forces decided they needed to give some concessions. So they gave about 45% of the seats to Bernie people, 55% to the Hillary Clinton loyalists. And those loyalists included the person who was put in as chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon. And I saw time after time, and James Zogby. Jim Zogby is such a fantastic, peaceful warrior for truth and justice. And Jim Zogby was on that Unity Reform Commission, and he kept putting forward resolutions for transparency on finances.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be disclosure of who is getting what consultants are being paid, how much money to do what by the DNC. And those resolutions were voted down again and again through the leadership of Jen O'Malley Dillon. Well, her friends were getting rich off of these consultant fees from the DNC and the Democratic Party writ large. What happened to Jen O'Malley Dillon? A few years later, she is the deputy chief of staff of the White House. Then she goes on to de facto really be running the Biden reelection campaign. And then she's running the Kamala Harris campaign for president last fall. And that campaign raises and spends over $1 billion with a B dollars in a few months, which is pretty phenomenal. You don't slosh that much money around without a lot of pockets being lined. So, of course, they wanted to win, but they never really lost because they got so rich in the process.
And they would not, because she ran Kamala Harris's campaign, and she and Biden would not allow her to move. I just read the book Fight, right? And these books are interesting because you have the chatter, right? And what was painful was to see that she, of course, is understandably anxious. I mean, she's on the biggest stage in the world, and the burden of history is upon her.
Right.
But she was bearing it up against a headwind, but most of us didn't know how much of a headwind she was facing. Her politics are more progressive than Biden's politics. And I could see her caught in between the horns of a dilemma about Gaza. But she's on the team, and the only way she got on the team was making certain compromises. I understand that too.
Yeah.
I'm not going to diminish anyone for the decisions that they make, because sometimes you think that if I get in there, maybe I can make a change. I can appreciate that. But something happened, Norman Solomon, to me that was so cold. She's getting ready for the debate. She takes a call from the president, and she thinks she's going to get someone who's going to charge her up and say, girl, you can do it. Go on, Kamala. He says, no daylight, kid. She looks at the phone like, wait a minute, what? And you better not move from any position that I have. So she has all this word salad. because
Yeah.
she's trying to figure out, huh? Because she's got these Palestinian and these young Jewish kids confronting her, and black kids too. And they're like, wait a minute, where's Gaza, Gaza, Gaza? And when she tries to talk about price gouging, the person who told her to back up off that was her brother-in-law, who's the counsel
Uber.
for Uber.
Yeah.
Mike, it's like she was. I'm like, did the Democrats want to win?
Yeah. There's that saying, how can you be in two places at once if then you're not anywhere at all? I had a lot of memories, and I actually wrote an article about this a year or more ago, and especially after Kamala Harris got in the race as the replacement for Biden on the ticket. Back to 1968, Lyndon Johnson was not that subtle even. I mean, it's bad enough, no daylight. That's what a terrible thing to say. What an egotistical betrayal of, in a sense, of the country. But what Lyndon Johnson did was humiliate, browbeat, threaten Hubert Humphrey when Humphrey became the Democratic nominee for president against Richard Nixon in 1968, to the point that it became unclear whether Johnson really wanted Humphrey to win. There was some indication that he actually preferred for Richard Nixon to win, in part because he didn't think Hubert Humphrey was enough of a lackey. He was, but not enough for LBJ's taste. And Vietnam War, Hubert Humphrey had trouble distancing. He didn't have the character to distance, to make a moral statement about that war. And when he finally, it wasn't even a moral statement, but he began to back away from the horrible bombing campaign led by President Johnson, too little, too late, very mincing steps. Well, I think what you're referring to is really parallel. Kamala Harris, the information we have is she started to inch away, and then she was told, and she heeded what she was told, don't you dare.
And she had no choice. You know, people keep saying, oh, I would have done. No, 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 no. She was talking to her boss, who was the leader of the free world. The people who were working for her were loyal to him, including the pilots of the plane. That part. She had no choice. But Americans' lives are on the line, Norman Solomon. And I think that's why this book is, this is so painful, because I see the corporate media, I see a family, I see the White House, I see the Democrats who put American people last. If we were considered at all, it's almost as if they were excited to see Trump win. I mean, please, maybe I don't want to read too much into it, but Dr. Biden even wore red on election day. Now, I wear red, that's my sorority color, but I didn't wear it on election day. I mean, really? Because I got the sense, because he still continues to say that he was the only person who could beat Trump.
Tremendous resentment. The apparently Biden and his inner circle. Ron Klain, the former chief of staff, this week continues to say that Biden should never have dropped out. I mean, that is unhinged.
What is he talking about?
Tremendous resentment towards the Democratic Party establishment. And I have no love politically for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, but there is resentment from the Biden camp that very belatedly they finally told Biden, you just don't have the support anymore of Democrats in Congress. They were just, being blamed for being the messenger for the bad news.
When you said at the top, original sin, that, that the original sin is shared amongst whom?
A lot of it is Democrats in Congress. And there were many, many saying, not for attribution, Biden should not run. But they kept their heads down below the barricades. They were so frightened of being the odd man, odd woman out, and they were enablers. And they made it possible for Biden to launch a campaign in April 2023, announced that he was going to run again. They helped him to do that because they suppressed their own understanding in the service of currying favor with the Biden White House. And that's where I think it comes to the present, because I don't really see that the dynamics have changed. Sure, the personalities are different. There's no Democrat in the Oval Office. But what about the underlying characteristics? Here we have Chuck Schumer, who should not be the Senate Minority Leader. He can't even go out on the road anymore to blue states. 2 months ago, his new book was being published, and his speaking tour was abruptly canceled because he was so frightened that he would be confronted by people who were enraged that he voted for the spending bill put forward by Donald Trump. And we're not talking about he was worried about hostility from conservatives or anything. No, he canceled a huge event right in San Francisco in the middle of March this year because, and this was the last minute, because he knew people were so angry at him. Well, what kind of Democratic leader is afraid of Democrats at the grassroots?
How is he still in leadership? Because we have people in lead. There is a disconnect between the people who are leading the party and leading the country and the people.
Disconnect completely. That's a key point. And for people in Minnesota, I think it's very striking. The chair of the Democrat National Committee is a former DFL chair. We're talking Ken Martin. And it was a high jump over low standards that he was better than his predecessor as chair of the DNC. But it's unclear where Ken Martin's going to take the DNC. That's a very powerful position, especially when there's no Democratic president. And so I would prevail on people who are listening. I'm sure many listening, they know Ken Martin. They've known about good things he's done. Prevail upon him. This is not business as usual. We at Roots Action have circulated, in combination with Progressive Democrats of America, a petition calling for the DNC to hold an emergency meeting. The DNC had their last meeting in February. They don't have their next meeting scheduled till late August. Meanwhile, the Trump regime is clobbering democracy. They're dismantling entire agencies. They're waging war on working people, on wannabe working people, on the elderly, on children. We have the Trump administration making war on the people of this country and on democracy itself. And the Democratic National Committee can't meet again till August. They can't change their schedule that just meets twice a year. I mean, come on, let's wake these people up.
And they're saying nothing. I mean, they are saying nothing. And the people who try to say something, they're not helping. This is just to fully disclose, I have another brother in Congress now. And he, Congressman Jonathan Jackson and Congressman Cleo Fields from Louisiana, one of the first Black congressmen out of the Deep South since Reconstruction, who was gerrymandered out of his seat by, the big family down in Louisiana, former mayor former senator, and her brother was the mayor of New Orleans.
Boggs and Landrieu?
No, Landrieu. Yes, that family. Well, he got back in. He just got back in January. The Democrats, and he's a proven vote getter. He was the youngest state elected official in American history. 21. He was a Jackson organizer in 84. And he got back in. They reconfigured his district. He got back in. The Democrats did not send a dime to him, didn't help him do anything. Well, they created the DEI coalition, and it's mostly white and brown. The Democrats have said nothing. You have some people who have tried. I mean, and that's just an example. You have in Texas an open seat. Sheila Jackson Lee died in July. Sylvester Turner died right after the State of the Union, hours later in March. Governor Abbott will not have an election until November. The Democrats have said nothing.
Yeah.
That is a vote. First of all, you have 800, 900,000 people who have no representation for almost a year. A year? And
outrageous.
No one says anything.
Yeah.
I mean, why are these not issues? I want to know and what is going to happen with David Hogg and Malcolm Kenyatta. Now, mind you, Malcolm Kenyatta and David Hogg are not on the same page politically, but because of some technical glitch, I think the glitch is David Hogg going after these Democratic incumbents. I don't know all the backstory on all of that, but I'm wondering how that's going to play with young people, with him being pitched out.
As the saying goes, the optics aren't good. He's 25 years old. He has a lot of leadership that he's exerted around stopping the gun carnage in schools and so forth. I think that Ken Martin's position is that you don't want officers of the DNC who are going to throw millions of dollars around and trying to affect elections, the primary Democratic elections. And I think that, that's a good point.
It is.
That said, though, the tonality of the attacks on David Hogg are not good. They're bad. He has a right to be heard. And on principle, these primary challenges are not only tolerable, they're essential. That's how we revitalize a party.
Not to mention the fact that they really do that anyway. The Democrats favor candidates.
Yeah.
The Democrats pushed out Bernie Sanders, for heaven's sake. They did that. Yeah. The powers that be came together. You remember that. They did it in 2016. They did it in 2020.
And it's very selective around the House races, because we will remember that Nancy Pelosi went way out of her way to campaign for and endorse Henry Cuellar.
Yes.
The only anti-reproductive rights, the only anti-abortion rights Democrat in the House. And this great supposed supporter of women's rights as Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, goes way, as I say, out of her way to support, campaign for Henry Cuellar, who later on was indicted, by the way, who was running against Jessica Cisneros. And Ms. Cisneros, a great community organizer, a progressive, and she lost by a very narrow margin. So in other words, Nancy Pelosi intervened to protect this incumbent against a progressive challenger. And then what happens a couple of years later? We have Jamal Bowman having $10, $12, $14 million thrown at him by the Israel Right or Wrong lobby. And what happens? The leadership of the Democratic Party, they don't even lift a finger to defend him. What about Cori Bush in St. Louis? Same thing, a courageous member of Congress who had introduced a ceasefire resolution, not just for Gaza, but for Israel as well, a ceasefire resolution. And the payback was these supposed supporters of Israel. I don't even think it's really support, but the Israel Right or Wrong crowd throws $10, $12 million to get Cori Bush out of office. So this is the double standard. The so-called leadership of the Democratic Party, they will go to the mat to defend a Democratic incumbent. And then when they want to jettison a progressive who's an incumbent, they do nothing to help.
Hill Harper. They offer him $20 million to come out of his U.S. Senate race.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. To go into a House race against Rashida Tlaib. AIPAC announces we're going to give $100 million to take out Democrats. Democrats have $100 million. You mean to tell me you do nothing to save the people who already have these seats?
Yeah.
I'm, you know, I need you to help me to understand. And as we're looking at original sin, we see the sin all the way around, but we
Yeah.
keep coming back to the party as it stands right now, and the corporate media as it stands.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people, while I understand when they say, we're already sick of hearing about the cover up, we're already sick of hearing about original sin. That's understandable. But if you don't acknowledge the problems of the past, you won't fix them.
Mm-hmm.
When the only electoral vehicle at the federal level to stop the Trump regime is the Democratic Party, if you can't cure the illnesses inside the Democratic Party, you're too weak to win.
What are the illnesses inside of the party?
I think it's conformity. I think it's corporate power. I think it's genuflecting to the gods of metal, the militarism of the military industrial complex. We have a top down party. And as you were pointing out a few minutes ago, the gap between the top of the party and the grassroots, where the votes are, is a huge distance. And when you have that kind of huge distance, and when you have the people at the top of the party afraid of their own base, then you don't have a strong electoral vehicle.
Are they afraid of the base, or are they ignoring the base?
Yeah, I think both.
Because I just saw this, because it was such a huge miss when President Obama came in on black men, and there was no apology.
Mm.
And the majority of black male voters went for Kamala anyway. But that was a turnoff, a real turnoff. And I see a party that has just they have grown more arrogant over time. As we need them, we need an oppositional force more than ever. I don't know if we need them, because I can tell you these young kids have already gone down the street. The pragmatists, I would say, they are still looking at the party, even though they are very disappointed. But there is there are a whole lot of kids in this generation who are done.
Yeah.
And it's not just young people, quite frankly. It's everybody. I mean, most Americans are now disaffected with both parties. But the Republicans are more popular than the Democrats. And the Republicans have brought along a new generation. Is J.D. Vance 40?
Maybe just barely. It's sickening, and the culture, and I think this goes to, again, our discussion of the past and the Biden White House. There's the statement by George Orwell: those who control the past control the future.
Mm.
Those who control the present control the past. We need clarity about what happened so we can fix it for the future.
How do we get whom do we ask?
I think it's about grassroots organizing. And also, while our discussion has necessarily been given the focus downbeat, we have heroes, including in office, including with a D after their name. I mean, I consider not only Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, but also Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. There are a number of people in Congress who are continuing to fight the good fight.
Where do we go from here? I mean, I'm looking at Roots Action, and I encourage everyone. I'm going to reach out to you. We've got our Rainbow Push convention, June 12th, 13th, and 14th. I'm going to reach out to you because we need to have you involved, and we need all hands on deck, because everyone needs to understand that the voting process is the beginning of the end. It's not the end of the beginning. Should I say it's the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end? I mean, it's the day after the election. That's when you absolutely have to become extremely engaged. But I want people to be excited. And this book is inciting. I just want to know how we can get to that which is exciting so that people will get involved in the process because they need to be involved. We all need to be involved more than ever before.
Well, going from inciting to exciting, I think that's a crucial step. And you're reminding me of another um, adjective or verb. Jim Hightower would say, it's the agitator that gets the dirt out. We need a lot of agitators. That's part of organizing. I remember, I don't know if our washing machine doesn't have one anymore, but when I was growing up, there was a big agitator in the middle of the washing machine. That's what you
Right.
depended on to get your clothes clean. So let's hear it for all those agitators out there. And if we organize, we can get a lot done.
What do you think will be our takeaway from this book?
I think it'll, among other things, be that if we can't learn from the past, we will, as the saying goes, repeat the same mistakes, or more precisely, we will allow the people in power to get away with repeating what for us was a mistake, even if they didn't care.
Norman Solomon, how do you lastly have that discussion in this grave moment uh, that, President Biden is in a life and death struggle? But I think he's been in one for quite some time, quite frankly, with the cognitive decline. But now we hear about the cancer. And so now it's interesting on CNN, the headline is his health. They're really trying to push down this book. I'm like, wait a minute, not so fast. Hold on. If we don't have this discussion, we will never get out of this pit. What's next? I mean,
The
how do we
context, I think,
now? How
at
do we
this
do it?
at this moment is, and you've started out the program here, our discussion beautifully about compassion for Joe Biden. This is a context for, I think, political work in general, empathy and compassion, and the compassion that we ought to bring to the suffering of Joe Biden with his cancer right now, we should bring to everybody who's being harmed and threatened and hurt by these cuts of US programs for healthcare and education and nutrition and housing. That compassion needs to go everywhere. It's not just for somebody who's the king, it's for somebody who we never heard of. And that includes the people in Gaza who Joe Biden had no compassion for. He actually made possible their ongoing suffering, the maiming and killing of so many innocents in Gaza. He lacked the compassion that we need to have.
I don't know how people miss that. They call him the mourner in chief. I said,
Yeah.
you've got tens of thousands, more than 100,000 people, souls, who are buried underneath that rubble. Does that not? You've been trying to bomb one of the poorest countries on earth, and yet the Houthis have fought back and they have emerged triumphant. We need to be very careful, Norman Solomon, because the world as we knew it is not the world that we will know. I just didn't. America, it's no longer a unipolar world. It's multipolar, and everybody's got a story. And the colonized are now stepping in front of the colonizers on so many levels.
Yeah.
I'll give you the final word here.
Well, you said it beautifully. I think you cited somebody earlier on in our discussion. Where we've been isn't where we're going.
Yeah.
And the world of colonizing and exploiting and sending in people with more money and weapons to push out those who've lived there for many generations. You can't have peace without justice, and justice is the first step.
Well, I just want you to know how much I love and appreciate you and the work that you do. You're so brave. You give me courage. Make me feel like I'm not alone. Right. But you know what? I think you help other people to know that we're not alone, but we have to come together. What do they say? If you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, you've got to go together. How can we get involved with Roots Action?
Well, I love what you just said. It's we're going forward together, and it's like what goes around comes around. We've got to keep organizing. You and your father and so many others have inspired me in my now 73-year-old life. At Roots Action, we really welcome people's involvement any way you want to participate with people around the country and the world. Our action alerts are available to you. Just go to rootsaction.org. That's ROTS action.org. Put in your email address and we'll be in touch.
And of course, continue to go to Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting if you really want to understand the story behind the story in the news. Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, no one does it better. And of course, Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you for Sam Husseini and the gift of Sam Husseini and the work that you all have done all of your life. Norman Solomon, you and Jeff Cohen have been guiding lights for me. And I just want to thank you. Thank you for giving me something to live up to. It's a very high standard. I'm going to get there one day.
Well, and vice versa. Thank you so much.
Oh, sending you so much love. AM 950 Radio, everybody, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm Santita Jackson with Norman Solomon of Roots Action. Hope to see you at the Rainbow Push Convention, June 12th, 13th, and 14th. See you tomorrow. Sending